Hi everyone, well good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Warm welcome to the School of Modern Languages here at Cardiff University. I'm Dr Joseph Lambert, I'm a lecturer in Translation Studies here at Cardiff, and it's my pleasure to be chairing today's event, which is part of the series of talks held by the department as part of the Transnational Cultural and Visual Studies research theme. I'm going to offer a very brief introduction to the event while people are still filtering out. I will keep it nice and brief. Just a few quick points of housekeeping first of all. So just as a quick reminder, the event is being recorded. You will have hopefully got a little pop-up message saying that that is the case already. The talk today will last about 40 to 45 minutes, and then it'll be followed by a Q&A section. So you can either ask questions during the event by typing them into the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. Within that, you can also upvote each other's questions as well, so we can get a sense of any burning questions that we need to answer. If you'd like to ask a question to our speaker directly, alternatively, you can wait until if you could wait until the end of the talk, that would be great, and signal that you would like to speak by using the raise hand function, which is also at the bottom of the screen. We'll then unmute you so you can be heard and ask your question. When you leave the event as well, just a quick note, there is a short survey. If you could complete that, that would be great. Just helps us with future events as well. So our next talk in this series, finally, in terms of the housekeeping, will be on Thursday, 20th of May, 4 p.m. And our speaker is Dr. Esmail Haddadian Moghadam, with a paper on biography as cultural diplomacy, Cold War bestsellers in the Middle East. So on to today's talk briefly now. So we're very pleased to have Professor Karin Hanta of Middlebury College in Vermont joining us. Karin has a fabulously wide-ranging profile and will be speaking on a really fascinating topic as well today. By way of a brief introduction, Karin's a polyglot educator, a 2-year Fulbright recipient, and she directs the Feminist Resource Center at Middlebury College. She's also penned 15 travel books for publishing houses in Germany, covering destinations from Brazil and Argentina to New York and London. So part of that really wide-ranging profile that I mentioned. She has MA degrees in American Studies from Notre Dame University and in Translating and Interpreting from the University of Vienna, where she also received her PhD in Translation Studies. Her research generally approaches feminist issues through a linguistic lens, and that's certainly a key theme in the talk today. At Middlebury, Karin's teaching as a professor of practice includes a course on the Holocaust and exile in translation as well. And these are both themes that will be present in today's talk. Finally, her dissertation, Back to the Mother Tongue, Austrian Exile Writers in the Austrian Literary Field, 1990 to 2015, was published as a book by Mandelbaum Press in Vienna in 2020, and again underlies the content of today's talk. So as you can see from the slides on the screen, the talk today is titled The Translator as Reconciliator, How Astrid Berger Repatriated Exile Writer Eva Kollisch in the Austrian Literary Field. Among other things, the talk is going to explore crucial questions of memory, remembrance, identity, feminism, and the translator's role as a cultural broker. And the sense I get from the preview I had is there's also this question of the importance of mutual understanding, or this kinship of identity between author and translator. And all of these themes have been really, really prominent and quite topical within translation studies, particularly in recent times. So personally, I can't wait, very much looking forward to this. And I'm going to stop there. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Karin for the talk.
Well, thank you, Lel, Nick, Joe, Abdel, and the Transnational Cultural and Visual Studies Research Group at the School of Modern Languages for including me in this illustrious series. I'm quite humbled by your invitation. Oops, now I can't. Oh, here we go. Yep. The talk I'm going to present today is culled from my dissertation and monograph, which both trace the role of translation in the creation of Austrian memory culture as it relates to the Holocaust. In his talk a few weeks ago, Professor Pym emphasized that research in translation studies needs to respond to urgent questions of our times. He also posited that translation projects can be viewed both as conversations and trust-building activities, and he encouraged our community to use interviews and focus groups as primary research materials. 25 qualitative interviews with Exile authors, translators, publishers, and cultural brokers in the field of Austrian memory culture were at the core of my dissertation and monograph, in which I examined the bridge building function that translation can have, both on a metaphorical and a linguistic level. At the time, I analyzed my research results with the help of Bourdieusian field theory. As I've continued my research beyond my dissertation, other instruments of analysis keep offering themselves to answer a broader question. In which ways can translation on a metaphorical and linguistic level help reconcile an author with a post-genocidal society in the wake of extreme harm committed towards the author? To answer my research question, I will both use a wide-angle lens to examine exile writer Eva Kollisch's relation with translator Astrid Berger and other cultural brokers in the field of Austrian memory culture, but I will also zoom in on small linguistic units on the translation project, Eva Kollisch's autobiography, The Ground Under My Feet, or Der Boden unter meinen Füßen in German. I will demonstrate how the coalescing of two different types of subjectivity, one nomadic and one implicated, helped cement the translation, the excellent translation of a decidedly feminist memory project as an activist intervention in Holocaust and exile remembrance. By parsing out different strands of memory activities, I will try to show how a nœud de mémoire, a memory knot, emerged, multi-directional one in which different strands of memory activities intersected. This nœud de mémoire, memory knot, not only gave the writer Eva Kollisch, a teenage refugee from the Nazi regime, a certain sense of belonging in her childhood community, and on a larger scale in the country she was forced to leave, but also helped turn the communicative memory contained in her autobiography into cultural memory. I have divided my talk into 5 sections. I will first provide a historical background, then give biographical information about Eva Kollisch, then zoom in on the translation of Kollisch's work into German, and then more specifically into Astrid Berger's translatorial work, and give a final analysis of the translation project. So a bit about the historical background. About the historical context in which the relationship between the author and her translator and their translation project is embedded. Immediately after World War I, Austria tried to portray itself as Hitler's first victim due to the fact that the German army had quote unquote invaded Austria in March of 1938. This formula, Hitler's first victim, became the Second Republic's foundational myth and its guiding principle in dealing with its Nazi past and its citizens' responsibility for war crimes. That is why the injustice committed towards 65,000 Jewish Austrians who perished in the Holocaust and the suffering of about 130,000 Jewish Austrians who were forced to flee was hardly addressed. A real watershed occurred in 1986 when the former United Nations Secretary General Kurt Waldheim became president of Austria, even though his newly discovered service as an intelligence officer in the German armed forces during World War II raised international controversy. The Waldheim affair triggered national and international outrage and led the Social Democratic Chancellor Franz Vranitzky in 1991 to finally acknowledge a share in the responsibility for the pain brought not by Austria as a state, but by citizens of its country upon other people and peoples, officially dispelling the notion that Austria was Hitler's first victim. Vranitzky's government followed this turnabout in official rhetoric by setting up various institutions dedicated to Holocaust and exile remembrance. One of these organizations is the Austrian Archive for Exile Studies, which was set up in 1993 to connect with the exile community and preserve their artistic work. One of the authors documented in the archive is Eva Kollisch. Eva Kollisch was born in the spa town of Baden, 30 minutes outside of Vienna, in 1925 to bourgeois secular Jewish parents. Her father Otto was an architect and her mother Margarete a poet. When the Nazis incorporated Austria into the Third Reich in 1938, Eva Kollisch and her family escaped from Austria and finally were reunited in Staten Island, New York. While in high school, Eva Kollisch became a member of the Workers' Party, a Trotskyist political group. Upon graduation in 1944, she worked in a factory in Detroit for 2 years to mobilize workers for her party's cause. After leaving the party, she became active in the feminist and peace movements, pursued a PhD in German and comparative literature, and taught at the all-female liberal arts college, Sarah Lawrence. One of her colleagues at Sarah Lawrence was Gerda Lerner, a historian and fellow refugee from Vienna, credited with starting the field of women's studies in 1970. Eva Kollisch joined Lerner's efforts, teaching a first course on female writers, and the interdisciplinary field developed from there. Even though Eva Kollisch kept up her German and taught the language, in 2000 she penned her first autobiographical novel, Girl in Movement, about her time with the Trotskyist group in English. She wrote her second book, The Ground Under My Feet, in English in 2008. In this book, she describes her childhood in Vienna and escape from Nazi terror. For her work, she was distinguished with the Theodor Kramer Prize in 2012, an award given out by an Austrian organization dedicated to exile literature and writing in resistance. The excerpt in the next slide shows how Kollisch highlighted the intersections of gender and class against an anti-Semitic backdrop, clearly demonstrating why her work can be classified as a feminist memory project. And I maybe give you 30 seconds to quickly read it. Yes, so going on to the next section. After her poet mother, Margarete Kollisch, passed away in 1979, Eva Kollisch started to organize her literary estate and found a home for it at the Leo Baeck Institute in New York. In the process, she also connected with the Austrian Archive for Exile Studies in Vienna and its director, Ursula Seeber, who had been editing a series of autobiographical works of exile writers since the mid-1990s. In connecting with various exile writers, Seeber performed what seems to me an act of cultural translation on a metaphoric level, as Homi Bhabha described it, both towards the exile community and towards the Austrian state. To exile artists, Seeber communicated an image of a reformed Austria to assuage some anxieties about entering into contact with representatives from the country that had forced them to flee. Upon first being contacted, some of them had been reticent to speak about their life and work. As a cultural broker within the confines of the Austrian state, on the other hand, Seber staged a, quote, encounter with newness, end of quote, with newness taking on the shape of autobiographical exile novels, and performed an, quote, insurgent act of cultural translation, end of quote, by paving the way for these works to be introduced into the national literary field. On an affective level, in her choice of translators for the series Exilbibliothek, Seber was acutely aware of the pain that authors felt who had been forced out of Austria as children because of their, at times, partial loss of language. She therefore paid particular attention to finding translators, primarily female identified, who were sensitive to the trauma that these exiles had suffered. In Seber's view, these translators could not act as quote unquote know-it-alls and quote dictate what the translation should look like, end of quote. Instead, they had to accept that the authors still had competence in the German language, and they needed to skillfully negotiate the translation process with the authors, who would give their input on the translator's work. Kollisch in turn felt a close affinity towards Seber, who made her feel very welcome. In my interview with her, she remembered, quote, at first I did not understand why Ursula was treating me so nicely, but then it dawned on me. What I am is what she does. She is interested in precisely what I have to say, what I have become, end of quote. This act of cultural translation can be considered a reconciliatory gesture and was further enhanced by Czernin Press, a publishing house focused since 1999 on issuing anti-fascist works. The translation project of Eva Kollisch's autobiographical novel, The Ground Under My Feet, got underway when Astrid Berger, 32 years Eva Kollisch's junior, entered the scene. Berger was born and raised in Kollisch's former hometown Baden and taught English and history at the high school that Kollisch had attended. Together with her pupils, she participated in the project A Letter to the Stars, in which 50,000 Austrian students researched the life stories of Holocaust victims and survivors. Astrid Berger came across Eva Kollisch in her research and invited her to speak at her school in 2008. As Berger and Kollisch got to know each other, Berger offered to translate The Ground Under My Feet. Translation funds had run low at the Austrian Archive for Exile Studies at the time, probably because a right-wing extreme right coalition government had been in power for quite some years. Kollisch replied that she would not want to pay for the translation because she thought that it was Austria's duty to cover the cost of a translation, quote, into her mother tongue, end of quote, as a compensation for all the wrongs the country and its residents had done to her and her family. But Berger did not want to be compensated because she considered the act of bringing Kollisch back to her mother tongue, quote unquote, mother tongue, quote unquote, labor of love that could only be a win-win situation for her. After translating a third of the book, Berger visited Kollisch in New York to go over her work. Their collaboration proceeded harmoniously, with Berger readily explaining to Kollisch her translation choices and in a few cases correcting passages that Kollisch felt her translator had misunderstood. When Berger listened to Kollisch speak German, she realized that she, like other bourgeois residents of the 1930s, had a different speech melody than what was current in Vienna in the early 2000s. It seemed to her that Kollisch's speech had been preserved in a, quote, pickle jar from the Habsburg memory, end of quote, and was replete with the choicest of expressions. When it came to translating Kollisch's book, Berger let herself be guided by these speech patterns. The translation project cemented Berger's activism in Austrian memory culture. She felt that it was of utmost importance that the residents of Baden, and especially young townspeople, read the book and learn what the experience of ostracization and state-sponsored violence was like for a Jewish girl in particular. She also felt that the book should be translated by a Baden resident. For Austria as a whole, Berger thought it was imperative that this work of exile literature be available in a German translation. Besides translating Kollisch's work for free, Berger also advocated with the city government of Baden for the creation of a Holocaust memorial sculpture, which was inaugurated in 2017. As lesbians, Kollisch and Berger shared another link that strengthened their emotional attachment to each other. Berger relates her fascination with watching Kollisch openly living her life as a lesbian and learning about the experiences of a woman one generation older than her. She attributes the closeness she feels to Kollisch and her work not only to the fact that she wanted to contribute to Austrian memory culture, but also to this shared bond. If we look at Astrid Berger's translation in closer detail and compare it to the English version, a few things stand out. Even though both author and translator identify as feminists, Berger did not use any of the various ways available in German to denote gender inclusivity when referring to groups of people. Nor does she stage a feminist linguistic intervention by using Frau instead of Mann to refer to the depersonalized third person and disrupt the centuries-old convention of centering the masculine in grammar. Astrid Berger may have made these more conventional choices in order to further the cause of quote-unquote repatriation and familiarize the general innovation-adverse public with Eva Kollisch's life story and work. While foregrounding a feminist and female-identified voice in Austrian memory culture, critical of the country's Nazi past, the scopus of this translation project was to secure maximum readership. Exile writers who pen their autobiographical accounts in a language other than German often insert German words to describe something that has been irretrievably lost. One of these words is Heimat. Heimat denotes a place where a person was born and to which said person feels a strong emotional attachment. Yet this word has also been tainted by the National Socialist blood and soil ideology since World War II. Still, exile writers use this word as they remember their country of origin before the Nazis' rise to power. One translation that quickly comes to mind for Heimat is homeland, yet homeland does not carry the same emotional weight that Heimat does. Even though Eva Kollisch uses several German words in the first chapter of The Ground Under My Feet, she does not use the word Heimat, but instead opts for home when she says, quote, "Still, it can happen when I visit my newfound Austrian friends who had been classmates as a child, that I envy them, that they have been able to live in one place they call home, even though that home had at times been terrible." And you have the German translation here on the slide. And in this German version, rather than opting for a term such as Zuhause, which can also denote home, Astrid Berger chooses Heimat, which gives reader a sense of the feeling of belonging. As this loss of Heimat is publicly addressed in the book, German-speaking readers are left with the feeling of how unjust it was that Eva Kollisch had been expelled from her country of origin, the place to which she was attached through family bonds and ties of friendship. Eva Kollisch uses the word mother country when she talks about her survivor's guilt. Quote, "Still it can happen in the oddest moments, but especially when I visit my quote unquote mother country, that the ground begins to shift under my feet," end of quote. The fact that she uses mother country instead of fatherland can be attributed to her feminist Weltanschauung. In fact, in my interviews with her, she referred to both her mother and her mother country several times. She related how her mother was, quote, "a woman reared in the culture of the German-speaking region," end of quote. For Kollisch, the person of the mother, mother country, and mother tongue were closely interrelated. She said the following about the forced loss of her mother tongue, quote, "For me, German is a foreign language. It's actually my mother tongue, but the mother has turned into a stranger," end of quote. The quotation marks around mother country in my intonation give a sense of Kollisch's feeling of alienation from her country of origin. Interestingly, Astrid Berger chose to translate the motherland by using the more current term Vaterland, however, in quotes, fatherland. And you see the translation here. Again, this change of perspective from mother to father can be explained by the fact that Berger did not want to alienate readers by using the less commonly used term Mutterland, a more feminist intervention, and that she decided to go with the more common term Vaterland, albeit in quotation marks. An examination of how Eva Kollisch refers to perpetrators is also of interest. She describes a scene a few days after the Anschluss in which she, along with her parents and older brother, was arrested. Quote, "We all had to get dressed and accompany the neighborhood brown shirt hoodlums to the headquarters," end of quote. In German, Astrid Berger translates the sentence or the term brown shirt hoodlums with Nazi Schweine. While Eva Kollisch's brown shirt hoodlums specifically refer to the violent stormtroopers of the paramilitary Sturmabteilung unit who used to wear brown shirts, Astrid Berger remains more general, turning the brown shirts into Nazi pigs. While hoodlums can refer to violent thugs, pigs refer to people who are generally beyond the pale. The fact that Berger uses this expression can also be seen as a phenomenon of an Austrian memory culture that started in the early 1990s and condemned Nazi atrocities outright. I would now like to go back to the research question at the beginning of this talk. In which ways can translation on a metaphorical and linguistic level help reconcile an author with a post-genocidal society in the wake of extreme harm committed towards the author? As I have outlined the genesis and development of the translation project, The Ground Under My Feet, I would like to explain how, in my view, two different types of subjectivity help make this translation project a success. First, I would like to apply feminist philosopher Rosie Braidody's concept of nomadic subjectivity to Eva Kollisch's life and work. For Braidody, exiles, along with migrants and refugees, have history and belonging tattooed on their bodies, and they may in turn feel, quote, empowered and beautified, or scarred, hurt, or wounded by it, end of quote. Those among them who defamiliarize themselves with their quote unquote home grounds and consciously relinquish any sense of fixity for multiple belongings can turn into nomadic subjects and distinguish themselves for engaging in self-reflexivity about their life experience in, quote, a collective process that relies upon interrelations and social networks of exchange, end of quote. Their shared political accountability manifests in, quote, the process of putting into words, bringing into symbolic representation that which by definition escapes consciousness, end of quote, in memories and narratives. What stands out about Eva Kollisch's life and work is both her seeking out of collectives to work on future-oriented progressive projects and her constant reflection on her life experience in her journals. Overcoming her status as a refugee, Kollisch took responsibility for actively shaping the political future of the United States and the world in general as early as her teenage years. After leaving the Workers' Party, she continued her activism in the feminist and peace movements, demonstrating especially against the Vietnam War. Her foundational work for the interdisciplinary field of women's studies can also be viewed as a manifestation of her optimistic belief in an ultimately global academic field of study that works toward establishing equity and equality for all human beings. Her journals provided the basis for her two autobiographical works, which as feminist memory projects are the most public expression of Kollisch's nomadic subjectivity, actively offering resistance to a phallo-logocentric world order. Secondly, as Olga Castro and Emek Ergün have pointed out, if we consider feminism a movement that, quote, re-envisions the future of the transnational as a polyphonic space where translation as a feminist praxis is embraced as a tool and model of cross-border dialogue, resistance, solidarity, and activism in pursuit of justice and equality for all, I would argue that the actors from non-governmental institutions such as Ursula Seber from the Archive for Exile Studies, translator Astrid Berger, the Czernin Publishing House, and the jury of the Theodor Kramer Prize were instrumental in the implementation of a feminist memory project of radical solidarity. Berger's willingness to translate without pay facilitated the journey of an important feminist text about a girlhood marked by exile back to the writer's quote-unquote mother tongue. Through their acts of cultural translation and translation proper, all of them tried to repair or at least mend the relationship with Eva Kollisch. A product of Austrian memory culture, this feminist translation project succeeded precisely because it was rooted in a desire by all the Austrian actors involved to right a historic wrong and prevent future injustice from happening. I would therefore argue that this urge to right a historic wrong was based on all the actors' implicated subjectivity. In his definition of the concept, Michael Rothberg points to a particular type of subject position in a history of injustice or structure of inequality. Quote, a history or structure one may enter long after the injustice has been initiated, end of quote. Assuming a special responsibility in future-oriented actions, these subjects work, quote, with and through the past in transformative works of remembrance, broadly understood, that may include aspects of reparation, restitution, commemoration, and historical education, end of quote. Working under the maxim of never forgetting and assuming a responsibility for highlighting their parents' generation's guilt for the Holocaust, all the actors involved were implicated through their life choices in future-oriented projects to spread awareness of the past and attempt to prevent the return to an anti-democratic fascist society. Most important in the quote-unquote repatriation endeavor was the contribution of self-declared feminist and implicated subject Astrid Berger. Echoing Walter Benjamin and Jacques Derrida, Emek Ergün has pointed to the significance of text choice by a translator, a choice that we could call, using Anna Strove's categorization, sympathetic, and even more than that, reconciliatory. Because Astrid Berger was able to not only empathize with Eva Kollisch's life experience, but also offer her cultural mediation services to give Kollisch a sense that she was welcome in her country of origin. A translation of her autobiographical writing into German urgently needed to be published at a time when Kollisch could still visit her old school and talk to its students. Berger pursued the project on her own initiative, almost like an embodiment of the entire Austrian Republic, because she was convinced that the afterlife of the translation of Eva Kollisch's autobiography was primordial for an Austrian audience, especially one from Baden and also particularly young people. Even though the project proceeded harmoniously, Astrid Berger emphasized that translation choices were being negotiated and that she was well aware of the pain that Kollisch's unfamiliarity with certain expressions must have caused. In the passages I have pointed out, Berger exercised caution to make sure Kollisch would find the widest readership possible. She opted to stay away from feminist linguistic interventions, but used terminology clearly denouncing the involvement of residents of Austria in Nazi atrocities, in line with an increased awareness of Austrian citizens' share of the responsibility for war crimes, and with a subsequent change in Austrian memory culture in the early 1990s. Berger also sought to bring the text from English into German on an egalitarian basis with the author, and always listened to what Kollisch had to say. Kollisch felt heard in the process, noting her deep satisfaction with the translation, which also led to a lasting friendship. And if we refer back to what I said at the beginning, when I mentioned Professor Pym and his definition of translation as a trust-building activities, this applies to this case. Both women remember their collaboration fondly 10 years after its completion. Eva Kollisch told me that she considered her work as a hand extended towards reconciliation with Austria through a common language, a hand that Berger, Seber, representatives at Czernin Press and the Theodor Kramer Society willingly took. Kollisch welcomed the fact that she was translated back into her mother tongue because her nomadic subjectivity predisposed her to establishing a connection through translation based on her hope for a prejudice and violence-free future. Quote, once you return to your mother tongue and use it more, something opens up inside of you, Kollisch remarked in her interview with me. And that's when part of the battle is won. Then the translator is no longer a stranger, then she's just like me. The only difference is that she knows German a little better than me, end of quote. The question arises whether this encounter through translation of a nomadic subject and implicated subjects, the older a diasporic author and the younger ones firmly rooted in the country that first marginalized and then expelled her, constitutes a multidirectional nœud de mémoire, and whether such a knot can develop between subjects who are involved in contributing to one and the same memory culture. I would argue that it is precisely this encounter of the nomadic and implicated subjectivities that made such memory-based knot possible. Even though all the actors involved on the surface may seem to contribute to Austrian memory culture exclusively, they come to it from different angles. Eva Kollisch from that of a victim survivor who has lived in the United States since her teenage years, all the other actors from Austria, why they grew up in a post-fascist society and consequently actively participated in a movement that advocated for a change in cultural memory. Through their translating, publishing, and editorial activities, they made possible the transfer of a work of exile literature that does not limit itself to recounting the experience during World War II, but also creates empathic, diachronic connections with communities that have suffered similar fates. Thank you.
Thank you, Karin, so much for a really rich, wide-ranging and insightful talk there. I'm going to open it up to questions now. Is there anyone who wants to speak? Please feel free to add to the Q&A box or to raise your hand for questions.
Should I stop sharing?
Oh, you can do, yeah, if you want to. So, interesting question to start us off. So this is from Nick. So, could you tell us about the reception in Austria?
The work was received very, very well and received more publicity through after Eva Kollisch won the Theodor Kramer Prize. I'm not sure whether there's a program. I don't think there's a program to distribute works of exile literature at schools, but I know that teachers themselves have been actively involved in reading such works with their students. Also the text, Der Boden unter meinen Füßen, has an epilogue by Anna Mitkuc, quite renowned feminist author, so that gives the work further prestige.
Excellent, thank you. A couple of questions
and also if you go to the newly established Museum for Austrian Literature, it was established in 2015, you have a whole section on exile literature, which was really the fruit of all the efforts of people involved in this change in memory culture. And you see Eva Kollisch's work prominently featured. So I hope visitors take their cue from there.
Thank you. Question from D-Man now in the Q&A. So first of all, thank you for this illuminating talk. I have a question about your use of interviews as a primary source. Can you say more about this and how the field of translation can benefit from such sources?
I used 25 qualitative interviews in my dissertation, and then they were semi-structured interviews, and I tried to get at common themes and then tried to work these themes into a Bourdieusian field analysis using illusio and capitals. What I feel interviews do is really getting at the heart of what's happening in translation, what's happening with people as subjects. But I was not able to really employ Bourdieu's concept of habitus, because I didn't feel I had enough data for that. So that's where the different concepts of subjectivity really spoke more to me after I finished my dissertation, and when I really wanted to parse out what was going on an interpersonal level between the authors and the translators.
Thank you. Quick question from Sylvia in the chat. So thank you very much for these very interesting insights. Maybe I missed it, but did you get a chance to speak to Astrid Berger too?
Yes, of course, and Astrid Berger might even be in the room.
I see there is an Astrid Berger in the participant.
Gave me a really insightful interview, so thank you for it, Astrid.
Okay, excellent. And can we compare her experience with any other translators? Another question in the Q&A from Rania.
Whose experience now?
Good question. Hopefully Rania could clarify that.
Astrid Berger's.
I'll check if that comes up. We can come back to that question, see if it's clarified. Sure. There is another one from Louisa.
Yeah.
Okay. So hi, Karin from Louisa. Thanks so much for your talk. Can you tell us a bit about how Eva Kollisch took the translational choices Berger made, if you know that is? Thank you.
They were able to negotiate. They sometimes disagreed, but everything was resolved very harmoniously. Sometimes Astrid had to tell Eva, you know, that's no longer how we say it in German. And then sometimes Eva would say, you know, in English, this means this and that. And then Astrid revised it. But in general, so there were 6 Exile authors that I interviewed and 6 of their translators. And some of them were very reticent in the beginning and felt a lot of pain for being translated back into their mother tongue. But they were able to, the translators and also the other cultural brokers were really able to give them a sense of belonging and of being understood and of really being welcome back in Austria. And so the first roadblocks were overcome and the translation projects all were a success, and they could have failed at any point. We really should be aware of that. Laurie Siegel was translated into German in the 1980s, her book, her first American, and she did not have such a good experience there and still remembers it to this day.
Thank you. So we'll return to Rania's question. There's no clarification there, but I mean, so comparing her experience with other translators, presumably Astrid Berger. So there were multiple translations. You mentioned some from earlier. Did you have Kollisch's work as well?
Yes, The Ground Under My Feet. No, Girl in Movement. Her first work was also translated into German through the Archive for Exile Studies, and Sabina Ilmer translated her, and she had less contact with Sabina, and it also proceeded fine. But I think Eva really appreciated getting to know Astrid, having a shared bond of being in Baden, being a resident and being back in Baden and being welcomed in her school and working with her in New York as well.
Yeah, a really fascinating relationship between the two and this kind of complicity in some ways, you know, these shared links.
Right. And Sabina Ilmer also did an excellent translation of Laurie Siegel's work, autobiography. Yeah.
Thank you.
A Child Alone. Sorry, not A Child Alone, Karma's King.
Another question on interviews. So great talk. Can you talk more about your interviews in terms of your relationship to Eva Kollisch, for example? Were you able to verify, correct, question, or otherwise put the interviews in context?
Can you specify a little more?
That's everything there. There's quite a lot to unpack, I suppose, in there as well.
Context? In what way?
I'll see if another comment comes through and we'll let you know. Or if the participant would like to clarify that live as well, feel free to raise a hand.
In the larger exile literature context? Or?
So the historical context and in terms of anachronisms as well. So that's the clarification we got. Thank you very much.
Whether anachronism, whether they were preserved or in language? Is that what the...
We'll see if this comes through again. I mean, maybe we could talk about the wider historical context as well.
The wider historical context of exile literature. So after World War II, there were exile writers who had to flee and continued their literary career in their coast countries. And what happened is when some of them tried to go back to Austria, the literary scene said that they didn't know German well anymore, or they, their work didn't fit anymore. So there was not really a sense of being welcome. And except for the few big names that we know, Hilde Spiel and others. But then with this change in memory culture, authors who had escaped as children and started their literary career in another language were really sought out, and there were a lot of efforts made to integrate them into the Austrian literary field.
Excellent, thank you. So another question from Rania, I think building upon the question that we had before in terms of comparing the experience to those of other translators as well. So Rania says, I'm asking, is there any other translators who had lived similar experiences with being deplaced and participated in the narrative of their, in their correspondent countries, maybe the Armenian exile? Give them as an example there.
I have to say I haven't studied other contexts as much.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions we've got for now. Anyone, please feel free to raise your hand or ask further questions as well. A quick note from something that struck me in terms of the concrete translational choices that you gave us, if I can ask this. I'd be interested to know the response of Eva Kollisch in terms of this move from mother country to Vaterland, because you said it was such a central element in the interviews when you spoke to her, that she mentioned her mother and the importance was very clear to you. I wonder if you had any kind of insight into how that transformation took place, especially in the context of this feminist approach that she was presumably wanting to foreground there.
I think it in my view, and maybe Astrid will say I'm wrong, in my view, it's really about scopus, that Vaterland is such a more current term than Mutterland, and you just want to get as many readers as possible and not alienate them in the process of reading, because the content itself is really quite innovative. It really offers a feminist evaluation of the Holocaust and exile. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And we've got a new question in the Q&A, which has brought up a topic that I thought might end up coming forward today. So the question is, does this allow you to have sympathy with Amanda Gorman's desire to choose her own translators? this seems successful because of the good relationship between author and translator. So in this case, there is success.
This meaning to what I just talked about?
Presumably, yeah.
Yeah, I think the Amanda Gorman case is a question of translation sociology and very interesting. And I wish the publishing house or the publishing houses would have the foresight to really foreground a voice or a person like Amanda, not like Amanda, it's not the right word, but of a minority background, if you will. And really, yeah, if they go on reading tours, like have two young women. And of course, the translator needs to have the skills to translate and also be familiar with the text type that Gorman produces. But I think it was a mischance or not a lot of foresight on the part of the publishing houses.
Yeah, really interesting, thank you. I thought that topic would come up, and I was particularly interested when you mentioned that one of the publishing houses were particularly keen to have a Baden resident translating the text as well. I thought this is quite a long way to go in terms of specifying the identity of a translator.
Right.
So a question, did the translation and her close collaboration affect the author's nomadic sensibility?
Can you repeat that, please?
So, so as it is here, did the translation and her close collaboration affect the author's nomadic sensibility? Perhaps the translator and her close collaboration?
I have to think about that for a second. Well, nomadic subjectivity is really tied to a polyphonic essence of being. And I think it kind of reconnected Eva Kollisch with German again, made her maybe aware of her multilingual identity. Yeah. I don't know whether it enhanced it in any way. I think through all of her activities and her life choices, her nomadism was quite established and strong. Maybe it added another nuance, the translation added another nuance.
Excellent, thank you. So that's all the open questions for now. If anyone else would like to answer, thank you so much for answering. You've had a wide range of questions to deal with there. If anyone else would like to contribute either live or in the Q&A, we've still got a bit of time available.
And I used the wrong, sometimes the wrong titles come to my mind. Laurie Siegel's work is Other People's Houses, of course. Not A Child Alone. A Child Alone is a work that I translated by Martha Blaine.
Okay, well, give it a couple more seconds, see if another question comes in, but we may be able to draw things to a close. Yeah, okay, well, if you're happy to draw things to a close, I think we've gone through all the questions. I just want to say thank you once again for a really fascinating talk. I've enjoyed it so much. And thank you so much for everyone who's joined us as well, and for the questions as well. So we've had a great little discussion afterwards. So as mentioned before, the next event in the series is on 20th of May, so in 2 weeks, another exciting talk to look forward to then. But yeah, thank you so much, Karin. Thank you to the organisers of the event, and thank you to everyone who's participated. So we'll stop there for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.